From the book of Wisdom, how God did not make death and does not delight in the death of the living. So death for human beings entered into the world through the sin of Adam and Eve, as well as all kinds of other sufferings. Now we see in today's gospel reading that Jesus raises the dead girl and he heals the woman with the hemorrhage that she had for 12 years. And this kind of manifests to us the beginning of God's plan to fulfill what he had originally intended for mankind. And basically his original intention was that we should live forever, not just in our soul, but also in our body. Now this is the belief of us as Christians. We profess this when we recite the creed also, that we will be resurrected at the end of time. Our bodies will be resurrected, so both our soul and body will share either in the glory and joy of heaven or in the pains and sufferings of hell. And at the time of our Lord, or in the early church, most cultures believed in life after death, and this is clearly evident from burial rituals and people putting things in the gravesite with their deceased loved ones to help them in the afterlife. So they believed in the afterlife for many reasons, including even back then there were near-death experiences. There's historical evidence for that. But the issue of the resurrection, or belief in the resurrection, was something held only by the Jewish people, and not all of them. Only a certain group of the Jewish people believed in the final resurrection of all the dead at the end of time. But with the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection not just of Christ but of everyone becomes one of the principal messages of the early Christians. This is what we believe. This is what we continue to believe and to profess, that at the end of time Christ will return, resurrect all the dead, we will receive our bodies back, reunited with our souls. Now I wanted to contrast this Christian worldview, or some aspects of the Christian worldview, with the atheistic worldview. Now why do I want to do this? Well, partially to help us to understand what's happening in the world, what motivates atheists to believe what they do, and sometimes the atheists don't themselves understand what they really hold to, or the implications of what their beliefs are. And there are some young people who are kind of being influenced to become atheists, to reject belief in God. So this can be extremely useful and beneficial for us. So I wanted to contrast these two worldviews, Christian worldview with the atheistic worldview, but focusing on four themes or four elements. And those four themes or elements are purpose, justice, morality, and equity. So when it comes to purpose, we believe that God created us with a purpose in mind. So each one of us has a specific purpose. We contribute to the good of others. God created each one of us for a specific purpose. But even when it comes to mankind, even the visible world, it's all created for us, for our benefit, the beauty of nature, all these things. But basically the purpose of mankind is to attain to the glory of heaven, to be totally happy, to be totally fulfilled. And the key ingredient in all of that is love. Love of God first and foremost, and secondly, love of neighbor. So we have a purpose that we strive for. When it comes to the atheistic worldview, don't forget that atheism is, they buy into evolutionary theory, and atheists don't believe that we have an immaterial soul. They actually don't believe that we even have free will, that really our choices are just chemical processes. It's our chemistry or our genetics that inclines us to choose one way or another. They will admit that, certain amount of nurture, or how we are raised, the things that we experience, all these things can and do influence us, but basically we don't have free will. And we don't have a purpose, because we're here just by chance. I mean, we're just chemical processes. It's just an accident that life started on Earth. It's just an accident that humanity came into being. And it's just an accident that you are here. There's no real purpose. The only purpose that they would acknowledge is, well, we need to work at self-preservation, but also at the propagation of the human race. And, modern atheists, they say there's too many people, so they want to prevent that also. But from an atheistic point of view, you have no purpose. There's no afterlife that you can strive for. So your only chance for happiness is just the things of this world, and they realize the things of this world can't really make you happy. So it's not surprising that many atheists become depressed and suicidal. So that's purpose. The other thing is justice. You know, as Catholics, as Christians, we believe there is heaven, but there's also hell. And we believe that if we are good, we will be rewarded for that in this life, but also in the life to come. But we also believe that those who are very bad, very wicked, those who rebel against God, that they will end up in hell. In other words, justice will be served. Because in reality, there are some criminals who commit horrible crimes and seem to get off with it, but they can't hide from God. They can't hide from God's justice. And knowing that there is justice is kind of consoling. We want the bad and the wicked to be punished. We want justice to be done. We want order in society. This is what we want. But from the atheistic point of view, yes, they acknowledge that there is kind of a common consensus regarding rules and, you know, how people should live their lives. So there are laws that govern us, and they have a police force to enforce that. But basically, you could commit any crime you want as long as you get away with it. And so if you're really clever, maybe a good criminal, and you can get away with it, well, you don't have to worry. So it's okay to cheat, to steal, and rape, and all these things, as long as you don't get caught. This is sort of the atheistic worldview, taken to its extreme. Now, when it comes to morality, which is the next one on that list, as Christians, we believe that God is the source of all morality, that there is an objective morality that we are called to follow, and that sense of right and wrong is stamped on our human nature. And also when we look at empirical evidence, we can see that, you know, certain actions lead to bad consequences. It's clearly immoral. So as Christians, we believe we should be moral individuals. But various atheists have pointed out, you know, including Richard Dawkins, that there is no real right or wrong from an atheistic point of view. There is no real evil or real good, because it's all just chance occurrences. If somebody kills somebody, well, that's just nature taking its course. It's not really evil, kind of like animals killing each other. Well, it's not really evil, it's just nature taking its course. And you're not making the choice to do these things. As I mentioned, it's just the chemical processes or your genetics or whatever that inclines you to act the way that you do. So there's no real sense of guilt or shame or anything like that. It's just nature taking its course. They do admit that there is some level of goodness in society because we interact with other human beings. And, you know, they try to explain it in terms of evolutionary theory. So they say that families, you know, they manifest goodness to each other. You know, families are kind to each other because they want to survive. They want to be able to pass on their genes or the family genes to the next generation. And so it's advantageous for them to be kind to each other. And it's also advantageous to be kind to your neighbors, the people that you live with, or society in which you live, because if we're kind to others, they will be kind to us, which will improve our chances of survival and passing on our genes to the next generation. But in reality, there is no real good or evil, because there's no one really to judge. It's just chemical processes. This is atheism. So that's morality. And the final one is equity. And I use that word equity, I specifically choose that word because it's a word that gets thrown around quite a lot today. You've probably heard diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many politicians love to promote that phrase or those three words, as well as educators. Now, the Christian worldview is that we believe that we are all equal because we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And that pertains to our soul, the immaterial part of us. The part of us that, you know, will continue to live even after death. And so we believe whether somebody is young or old or rich or poor, highly educated or no education at all, even a criminal or somebody who's very good, they all have a certain dignity, an equality as human beings, and they have a right to be treated with dignity, with respect. This is the Christian view when it comes to equity. But some of these politicians, you know, they claim to be Catholic or Christian, but in reality, many of them really embrace the atheistic worldview. And in the atheistic worldview, there cannot be any equity. There cannot be any equality. Why? Because I may have better chemicals than you. I may have better genetics than you. I may be bigger than you are. I may be stronger than you are. And in fact, in the past, that was their argument, that, you know, it's the survival of the fittest. Those who were bigger or stronger or better able to fight could knock out their opponents, and so they would continue to propagate their genes. Now, today, it's not so much about physical strength that enables one to survive and to carry on, but you have to have the smarts and the intelligence to live in society. And so people in society who are in positions of power, who are well educated also, and usually are very wealthy because they're in politics and other things where they get all kinds of payments, they believe that they are superior to the lower class of people in society, which includes all of us. And especially Christians, because those stupid Christians, they believe in all this superstition about God and all these things. So they look down upon us. And in fact, you know, it's interesting how, you know, if there's some vandalism done to, you know, various religious groups, it's front page news and it's a big scandal. But when it's done, like the burning of churches and things like that, well, that's okay. And as Christians are a target, we get targeted more so than others. But you see, when it comes to the atheistic world point of view, those who are not contributing to the well-being of society are looked down upon. And we've seen in certain regimes that those who were, you know, unwanted individuals in society were exterminated. You know, even, for example, I mean, take China, for example, the harvesting of organs of prisoners. Hopefully you've heard of that, right? I mean, we would say that that's wrong because, okay, they're prisoners. They're often political prisoners, but even if they were criminals, they still deserve a certain degree of respect because they're human beings. You can't just take their organs and let them die. But this is the extreme of the atheistic worldview. And by extreme, I don't mean that it's not going to happen here. I'm saying if we allow atheism to continue as it does, this is where we end up at. This is the kind of society, the kind of mentality that we will end up in, where people don't really respect each other. So why do politicians who are atheists promote equity? They don't really believe in equity. If they really believed in the sanctity and the dignity of every human being from the very first moment of conception until natural death, they would not be promoting abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, or legalization of drugs, and so many other things, or I can't remember if I mentioned pornography also, but these things harm human beings, harm society. They don't really care. But they want your votes. And if they preach equity, well, it sounds good. It sounds very Christian, and the Christians will think, oh, I'm such a good person because I promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And not only that, I mean, yes, I think it's true there were certain individuals or certain groups of people that, you know, were suppressed or treated badly or didn't have, you know, equal chances. And, you know, I agree, that's wrong. That needs to be addressed, sure. But you see, by promoting these you know, equity and all these things, right, it appeals to the Christian masses, but it also appeals to those minority groups. In other words, you're going to get more votes, and hopefully you'll be able to stay in power. And you see, the interesting thing is that these politicians, like, if you look at what's happening in the world, like the World Economic Forum and even the WHO, right, it's like they want more and more power over us. And more control. They're aiming for a one world government. And yes, the leaders in particular governments in particular countries, they want to stay in power because they know this is coming. They want to be in the upper echelon, the upper, class of the intelligentsia, the ruling class. They will be able to live free in fancy homes. They will have a good income, whereas the rest of us, it might be a social credit system, or, who knows what kind of subjection we will be subjected to. This is the reality. This is what they're pushing for. And this is the ultimate result of an atheistic worldview. And the number of atheists, as I've mentioned many times, keeps increasing. The number of believers keeps going down. So do we really want a world in which anybody can commit crime and hope to get away with it? Or a world in which moral norms can change? Those of you who are older, in the last 50 years, there have been so many changes. Things that were considered bad by everyone in society are now considered okay, and not just okay or acceptable, but even celebrated in your face celebration and the indoctrination of our children with all this stuff that is clearly not good. So you see how norms of morality can change very quickly in an atheistic worldview society, because it's the common consensus, whatever we agree upon. If everybody wants to agree that, certain forms of pornography are okay, then we'll be okay with that. Or even just pornography in general. This is where we're at. So it's important for us to be aware of these differences between the Christian worldview and the atheistic worldview. And part of the reason is because we tend to assume that everyone has a good Christian attitude. And I think in general, people are generally good, yes. But if you take the belief system of atheists to its obvious conclusions, it's clearly not a good world view. And basically it's going to make society kind of like what it is in China or North Korea. Do we really want that? No. So what can we do about it? Well, live our faith to the best of our abilities and try to educate people, especially young people, because they're being led astray. Sometimes these atheists, they accuse us of, you Christians, you don't really have genuine Christian charity. You're only acting good because you fear hell and you want to get to heaven. It's all just selfishness. Now, there is a certain level of truth to that. We do fear hell, and that is a good motivation to avoid sin. And yes, we want to be happy, we want to be in heaven, and yes, that is a form of selfishness. That is true. But Christ tells us to love our neighbor, not because we can make it to heaven, but because our neighbor is deserving of love. And he goes further, not just to love our neighbor, but to love your enemies, to love those who persecute you. We are called to have true and genuine love. We are motivated by love. We have a purpose in this world. But if you're an atheist, all your whole purpose is the self-preservation, self-enjoyment, and the procreation of the race. That is your only focus. That is your only goal. Sure, some atheists may contribute to the well-being of society, but that's your purpose. That's your goal. So what do we want for our society? But more importantly, what do we want for our children, for future generations? This is something important to consider, especially when it comes time to vote for politicians.